Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the biggest lingering questions around the top four teams going into this year. We'll continue that throughout the week likely, but let's get into segment 2 here, and let's talk about Will Howard. He is likely one of the most important, maybe the most important player in the entire country as we head into this year. I've talked about this on here before. If he plays elite level football, Ohio State's your national champion. Just plain and simple, they are going to be a team that is going to be nearly impossible to beat. But the big time question here is, did they really upgrade? Or is he outright better than Kyle McCord? Or is this something where they feel like they upgraded, but they didn't quite? And that's something that a lot of people have been debating, and some people have very different opinions on. Some say they didn't upgrade at all, and frankly, most of those people are wearing maize and blue right now. Some say he's going to be incredible this year, and they're wearing scarlet and gray. I don't wear either, so let's get into it a little bit. I'll try to be as unbiased as I possibly can here, but you're coming into a year with a guy like Will Howard that frankly has a lot of good football behind him. There's no question about that. Has won a Big 12 title against a team that went on to play in the national title, so is definitely someone that can play elite football. The worry is he's not a better passer than Kyle McCord, pretty much by any metric. There's really nothing you can point to because Kyle McCord last year had a higher completion percentage, more yards per attempt, less INTs than Will Howard has had any given year throughout his entire career. They've also had the same number of touchdowns a year ago with 24 through the air. So it's not like you're upgrading passing-wise. It's not like you're going from Kyle McCord to CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud's not walking through that door and putting every ball exactly where you want it to go. Now, it doesn't mean Will Howard is not capable of making that throw. But when you talk about the struggles of Kyle McCord last year, they were relatively wildly overblown. Let's just be honest. There were a number of games where he played really good football. They were within 6 points and really like 30 yards of beating that Michigan team at the end of the year. So it wasn't like Kyle McCord was atrocious. There was a couple of things that just weren't where they needed to be for this offense to be what it can. And there were a number of different ways to kind of look at this. When you talked about the CJ Stroud Ohio State team, they were pretty one-dimensional. You knew that the quarterback was not going to be a running threat. In fact, it looked like C.J. Stroud was outright scared of the line of scrimmage at times, but that's a side point. But on the flip side of that, every ball was exactly where it needed to be. He was making every single throw. There was never a misbeat. Everything was on time. So you didn't have to have that running threat because you always had to worry about the passing. In Kyle McCord's offense, they were both one-dimensional, but also weren't necessarily all that scary through the air. They didn't have the guy that was going to hit every single spot. So is Will Howard an upgrade? Is he a guy that is going to make this team outright better, or are we seeing a little bit of a repeat from last year? And frankly, I'll get to it towards the end of this, but maybe it doesn't even matter. But at the end of the day, I do think he is a little bit of an upgrade. I do think he is a upgrade from what Kyle McCord had, because you look at one stat very, very simply. Kyle McCord had a grand total of negative 65 rushing yards a year ago. Will Howard had over 300 in limited time. That's the difference. Plain and simple, that's the difference between these two guys. And frankly, it happens across the country where you have two guys that are roughly around the same level, where at least throwing the football roughly around the same level. You pick the one that's a little bit more dynamic. You pick the one that can make plays with his legs, and you pick the one that might be able to get out of a hairy situation and make a play for your team. So I think that's the big time thing where you're looking at all of these different things as you head into this season for Ohio State. And there's so many different questions about how Will Howard's going to handle all of this. And that might be the biggest part of this, and something I'll get into here right here, where Will Howard has a big-time question on his plate, where you're moving from Kansas State to Ohio State. They're both Power 5 conferences. They're both elite programs in today's football. They're both, playoff contenders. They're not the same thing. I think we all understand that. They're two very, very different things, and he needs to step in there with a lot of confidence, because the reality is you're trying to win over an entire locker room before you go on a run that has to end in the national title. So there's definitely a lot of pressure on him to become that leader for this team, to become the guy that they look to and say, that is our guy. We are going to follow him to the ends of the earth. And that's what you have at Texas. That's what you have at Georgia. That's what you have at Oregon. And Ohio State, you kind of need it a little bit. Frankly, Oregon's actually a fun one to watch as well with Dylan Gabriel, but it sounds like he's coming along more than fine. And I think Will Howard will too. I think Will Howard's ability to run the ball, I think Will Howard's toughness is going to be a huge part of this. And if you're questioning his toughness, you're more than welcome to go watch the Big 12 title against TCU. he makes every play that you want him to do, and he'll stay on the field when you might not want him to. So he's a very, very tough guy, and definitely someone that, even though, he was passed on by Avery Johnson, it just means that guy is more special. It just means, Avery Johnson is a different animal when it comes to running the football. It doesn't mean Will Howard is bad quarterback by any means. And I think one of the bigger things there was actually Avery Johnson. They moved on to him for a number of different reasons. But I think a huge one was when you have a guy that is that dynamic with his feet, and you have a conference in a lot of ways that does a lot of drop 8 coverage where they only rush 3 guys and they allow a lot of things to develop on the back end. Having someone that can just outright beat you for 20 yards down the field with his legs is a huge advantage. And while Will Howard could do that, you just take it to the next level with Avery Johnson. But getting back to Will Howard at Ohio State, this is the picture that I want to talk about the most. This is the moment that I want to talk about the most, because it is the moment that every defensive end, every linebacker that they face is going to be very confused. And that was the big difference. We talked about it a little bit ago where Kyle McCord, when he was running the offense, it was pretty one-dimensional. You knew what you were seeing from one side of the ball. You knew that if there was a play action, or if there was a, give to the running back, it was either going to be play action, he was going to back up to pass, or that running back was getting the ball and you were going to be able to meet him in the hole. That was the big difference. There wasn't this, huge problem with Ohio State's offense. It was really just little margins. But at the end of the day, using the moment where Will Howard has his hands on the ball, so does Quinshon Judkins. The defensive end is watching both of them. He has to make a decision. And the thing is, you can make a decision now, or the person that is, defending this has to make a decision now, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing that, Kyle McCord, that he knew that Kyle McCord could not get out and run for 20 yards around him. He knew that he didn't have that athletic ability. Will Howard does, and that's the biggest difference here, where you don't have defensive ends or linebackers that are just crashing into the box. You don't have, a ton of people just saying, well, the ball is in the gut of Travion Henderson, so the ball is going to Travion Henderson. That is rarely going to happen this year, because you got a guy right next to him that can burn you for 80 yards because he's done it in the past. So that's the thing about this, where it's no longer, you either have a pass from Kyle McCord and you know what's coming, or you have a run and you know what's coming. Now you could have what looks like a run turns into an RPO, or what looks like a run turns into a read option, and Will Howard is down the sideline before you even know it. And that's the biggest thing here, because Chip Kelly's offense, that's where the money is made. That's where he's been incredible throughout his career, and that's where at UCLA he was remarkably solid. Carson Steele and TJ Harden, two very solid running backs, got over 800 yards a year ago. Colin Schlee was the only running back that was a real threat, and he didn't play too much, still finished with 425 yards and over 10 yards a carry. That's the reality of this offense. And frankly, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, and Will Howard are all upgrades from those 3 guys that I just named. So that's the biggest difference here. You're going to be able to not only run the ball, not only pass the ball to the same extent, or maybe a little bit better than you were a year ago, maybe a little bit worse, but at the end of the day, what you're going to be able to do is keep people guessing. What you're going to be able to do is pull out that RPO and make sure that that linebacker dives on a run, or the defensive end, stays out on Will Howard, and you have Travion Henderson 15 yards down the field before the defensive end can really react. So that's the biggest difference to me. It's not, these, grandiose things. Can he make the passes? Can he take that step forward? Is he going to be able to run for 100 yards a game? It's just this moment. It's just the uncertainty that this causes elevates this offense that little bit more than they did a year ago. So while Will Howard, doesn't necessarily jump off the page when he's passing the football, he's not someone that is going to be, lighting up the stat sheet by any means. I can promise you that. He doesn't need to at the same time, and he has some really, really good players around him to make it a little bit easier. And for Kyle McCord, I think a year ago, you look at that team compared to this team, the two biggest differences is the wide receiver room really isn't just one guy, and I understand they had plenty of guys in that room a year ago, but Marvin Harrison Jr. was 700 yards above the next top receiver, and it was a tight end in Cade Stover. That can't be the case this year, and frankly, it likely won't be. You'll have to keep track of so many other guys because the ball is going to be spread out a little bit more, and you have two running backs right next to you that are very easy to get the ball to and then just let them do what they do in open field. So I think as you look at this, there's so many things heading in his direction that he doesn't have to be perfect. He doesn't have to be this remarkable quarterback. And frankly, in a number of different ways, he doesn't even have to really be an upgrade from Kyle McCord. He has, in my opinion, he has a more myriad of weapons this upcoming year. I think he has a better O-line. I think he has the best defense in the country. And I think he has a running ability that fits Chip Kelly almost perfectly. So you look at this team and you look at all of the different variables that go into it. And Will Howard is maybe the biggest variable of the bunch. It's not that big of a variable because all of the other things that are going forward for this team, all the other things that are fully set in stone, like this defense, like the pass threats they have, like the running back that they're going to have, and like the run game that they expect to have, he doesn't have to be perfect. He can be, play B-plus football, and they could win a national title. So it's one of those things that maybe he's not that big of an upgrade over Kyle McCord, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe he doesn't need to be a huge upgrade, and they can still win way more games, and they can still win a national title. Now, the whole other question is, can he make the plays that need to be made down a stretch of a big-time game? The Big 12 title made me feel pretty confident in that, but it's always a question when you move up. So it's definitely going to be really fun to watch. He's obviously one of the most interesting players as we head into this season, but at the end of the day, he's going to have to answer the bell, and he's going to have to at least play more consistent football than Kyle McCord. I don't know if he has to be a huge upgrade because of all the incredible things all around this roster, but he's got to play consistent, and he's got to make sure those legs play a part in this offense because that's why he was brought in, plain and simple. So it'll be fun to watch that one. Definitely one of the most powerful players in this entire season this upcoming year. But let's get into let's take our second break here before we get into who's going to be the odd team out in the SEC. This is a big time question for me, and frankly, there's likely going to be more than one odd team out. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of teams with a lot of expectations, and there's only so much oxygen in the room. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.